March 26th, a day that won't leave the minds of those of us unlucky enough to know the truth. On that day, a promising new IP died. A disaster that was somehow so spectacular, and yet few will ever know the true reach of its effects. I am one of them. Balan Wonderworld was found dead on store shelves and on digital stores the second it arrived. Maybe it wasn't a hot idea to release it on the same day as Monster Hunter Rise, but its troubles were only beginning. Now, it's up to me to figure out what could have gone wrong. This game had everything going for it, and yet, we got this. It's a tough job, but somebody's gotta do it. That and if I beat Matt McMuscles to making a Wahhappen on this, I'll be so happy. Balan Wonderworld, a game most famous for people remembering its name as Balan Wonderland, is the talk of the town right now. A game so disastrous that its sales figures look more like a worst possible timeline scenario rather than a reality, but we'll get to that. This isn't a video reviewing Balan Wonderworld. Heaven knows that my opinion isn't going to sway you to think this game is any better or any worse. I'm simply here for the history books. What happened to this game? What calamity happened in this game's development in order to give us the moist, flaccid flop of a game that we ended up with? Well, for that it's important to look at who made this game. Balan Wonderworld is the brainchild of Yuji Naka and Naoto Oshima, the brain trust behind Sonic the Hedgehog, with Naoto designing the character and Yuji making him move the way he does. This now makes Sonic tangentially related to two of the biggest 3D platforming disasters of the past 10 years. Square Enix brought Yuji Naka into the company at the beginning of 2018 and gave him the opportunity to make his very own platforming game, but were very clear with the fact that this was his one and only chance. If this game flopped, never again. This was an opportunity handed down from the president of Square Enix himself, Yosuke Matsuda, so there was a lot of weight on Yuji Naka to get this right. For this project, he wanted to make something totally out of the wheelhouse for what Square Enix makes, theming the whole thing after a stage show with heavy Cirque du Soleil influence, and the game would feature over 80 unique costumes! For that, he knew he'd need an elite team, and as such created the Balan Company, comprised of people both in and out of Square Enix. Pretty ballsy to name your whole new company after the name of an unproven idea, but it's at least a better name than Yuji Naka's last company, Prope. Speaking of that name, it was shared not only with the game itself, but the main character, a sort of dream ballet conductor, with more than a little itty-bitty bit of influence from Yuji Naka's previous works. Along with the Balan Company, Arzest was brought in to co-develop the game, having previously worked on We Play Motion, developing Yoshi's Island, and, hey, Pikmin. I'm sure we're in good hands. Development for the game started in July of 2018 and was said to be extremely open. The work schedule was very open and loose, not much was done in way of guiding the production, and this carried over into one of Balan's biggest issues as development continued. You see, Balan was developed in a big changing period for gaming as a whole. The game was being developed as talks of the new next-gen consoles were being passed around. As such, the developers were never able to fully lock down what they wanted Balan to be. Up to 50% of the way through production, people were pitching new ideas for the game, one which we'll discuss later. Overambitious seemed to be the name of the game with Balan, as one of the game's most defining features fell victim to that overambition. Remember earlier when I mentioned the game featured over 80 costumes? Well, that wasn't always meant to be the case. Oftentimes in game development, developers will shoot for the stars to see how much they can get away with, see how much their team is willing to take on. Shadow of the Colossus was originally meant to have over 40 Colossus, before being talked down to 24, and eventually 18. It's not uncommon, but rarely are these goals ever met. Such was the same with Balan. Yuji Naka never intended for the proposed 80 costumes to come to fruition, instead expecting somewhere around 40. However, as development went on, they were just thinking of more new costume ideas, and soon the 80 costume goal was met. That's all well and good, but when you see the final game itself, you realize that maybe it should have stayed at 40. So many of the costumes in Balan double dip on what they're capable of. In the demo alone, you have Dainty Dragon, whose fire blasts can destroy rocks, but so can Tornado Wolf's jump attack. And Pumpkin Puncher, whose fists not only go further than Dainty Dragon's fire, but can retrieve objects. Then there are costumes whose uses are so specific that they can be fulfilled by about half a dozen other costumes. God, I sure wish there was a costume that made me tall or nothing. Then there are costumes that are so worthless that quality of life would go up if they weren't in the game at all, like Box Fox or Hothead. It's clear that this is one of the parts of the game where the ability to say no was severely lacking. But how do you balance so many costumes for so many new players? I mean, that would require 80 different control schemes. Well, luckily for us, Balan solves that issue by doing away with those pesky buttons. Every input in Balan is controlled with only one button. Jumps, interactions, costume powers. The only thing that this controller is good for is pausing, moving, and switching your costumes. Not even in the menu does the B button do anything, which is disorienting as balls. And you heard me right, not all costumes have attacks that involve jumps like Dainty Dragon and Pumpkin Puncher, so for them you have literally no way to gain upward momentum. Why was a decision like this made? Well, according to the developers of the game, it was in order to make the game as appealing to as many people as possible. From an interview with Tech Radar, producer Noriyuki Fujimoto said, "From the very beginning, one of our goals for development was to create a game with every kind of action, to put in over 80 different kinds of action. But even if you include a huge variety of actions in a game, it's difficult to map all those to the buttons. It is difficult for the player to remember them all, and it's difficult to create an opportunity to use them all. When we were thinking about how to make the game easy for players to understand and use all the actions to their fullest, we came up with the idea of having one action per costume. This meant that we could make the action control intuitive, and gameplay simple enough to be enjoyed by anyone." So in case you missed that, the developers were scared that people would be unable to figure out how exactly to jump and use an ability in tandem with each other, so mashed all the inputs into a single button. That certainly wouldn't come back to bite them, right? But that's not all! We've only been talking about difficulties with gameplay. What about the story? If you played Balan Wonderworld, you'd be forgiven to assume that the developers intended for you to make up your own story. Almost nothing about who you are, who Balan is, what he's doing, what the Wonderworld is, who you're helping, and how you're helping them is explained in the game. On a personal note, when me and my brother watched the cutscenes for the game, we didn't even know if Balan was supposed to be a good guy or not until halfway through the game. That's down to Yuji Naka never prioritizing a game's story. To quote the man himself, "Square Enix's management philosophy is to contribute to the well-being of people all over the world by providing the best stories." When I joined the company and heard that, I was like, stories? Huh. To be honest, I'm not really the type of developer who focuses on a game's script. I always emphasize how a game feels in the action, while the story may be a little weak. I wasn't very good with stories. So what we have is a developer making a game's story under duress. Given the fact that he didn't want to make a strong story but knew he needed to, Yuji Naka read The Hero with a Thousand Faces by Joseph Campbell and got Naoto Oshima to bring in Saoshi Kawasaki, a Japanese novelist who's most famous for the Long Arm series of detective novels. For the game, Kawasaki wrote over 30 different scenarios for the levels, of which 12 were taken given the fact that the other 18 were too dark to use. "We did 30 scenarios. And these were the best ones." This might go a little ways to explain why some scenarios range from girl is betrayed by beloved dolphin friend and can never love again, a girl's parents die on the eve of her wedding and she has a breakdown, a guy's a little butthurt about to losing at a chess. But perhaps they thought that this no story wasn't enough story, so in steps Balan Wonderworld, Maestro of Mysteries, Theater of Wonders. A full book of lore dedicated to exploring the world and the characters in it. For instance, this is the only way that you'd figure out that this character's name is Lance. You know, the villain of the game! And he's the original guardian of the Wonderworld who created Balan to take over after he got overwhelmed by negative emotions. And hey, you know how you could have solved this problem? Instead of making a novel, you could have put it in the game! I feel like writing a whole novel and selling it independent of the game instead of including it as a code with physical copies is just another example of Balan's development getting way out of hand. Speaking of which, if you were looking at any promotional material for Balan, you'd notice something that was heavily pushed. The phrasing of a hero or two, the best way to save the day is with a friend. So obviously the game has co-op. But what you might be a little shocked to learn is that the co-op wasn't meant to be in the game. The game only got the co-op feature over halfway through development. Some people might not realize why that's a problem, so let me explain. When designing a level, you take into account the abilities of the player, what they can do, what they can't do, and how best to test those skills. For Balan, these limitations include only having one person around. So when you drop a second one in, complications arise. In short, the levels of Balan weren't designed to work with two people, and incredibly, they made the problem worse! The linking up mechanic of two players allows the player to jump twice. If you need to know why this is a problem, here's the second level of the first world to explain why. That's embarrassing. For some reason though, instead of letting it fall to the wayside, the marketing made it seem like the game was meant to be played in co-op, making it the main feature in so much of the marketing. All of these problems were a hill of beans compared to the biggest problem Balan would ever face. People got to play the game. On January 27th, the infamous Balan Wonderworld demo was released, introducing people to the game in the worst way possible. Instead of focusing on the gorgeous CD created by the same company behind the Final Fantasy movies, Visual Works, people harped on how sluggish and awkward the game was to control, how it looked primitive for being a next-gen experience, the lack of content, and the outright nonsense unfolding in front of them. Watching people react to the first dance scene in the game is a glorious display, however, and if you're gonna fall down any rabbit hole today, let it be watching people see Farmer Sneed cut a rug.
No.
What the f is going on?
Who the hell thought of this?
Very, very recent update. Since then, the game's demo has been removed from all digital stores, leaving people like me with a piece of gaming history? Publicity was in dire straits at this point. People could see what the game was turning into and wanted off the sinking ship. The Balan company tried to assuage fears by saying that the feedback they were given would help them improve the game, but that ultimately meant very little. By the time the game was released on March 26th, only so much could have been done. People cried for a delay to fix the game, but given everything we discussed already, it would have just delayed the inevitable. And the inevitable wasn't pretty. To put it simply, Balan Wonderworld was a disaster. People praised the CG cutscenes, character design, and music, but other than that, Balan Wonderworld left people with not a lot to love. Sitting at a 35 on Metacritic, this had to have been the worst the game could get, right? Oh, just watch me. In Japan, the game managed to sell, in its opening week, 2,100 copies. That's right, I didn't leave at a zero or anything. 2,100. And those that bought it clearly didn't play it for long, as if you unlock achievements on the Xbox version of the game, you can see that completing level 4 is considered a rare achievement. People predicted weak sales for a niche and very stylistic game, but this is below what some indie games get. But I think the response to the criticism was a little unwarranted, what with the Balan company trying to kill us in retaliation. A big bug was found day one, where when damaging the final boss, the entire screen would flash at seizure-inducing speeds. The game would get patched soon afterwards, but this was just the rotten cherry on a sundae of misfortune. This was a catastrophic failure, and if the information at the beginning is to be believed, this game has murdered any chance of Yuji Naka being put at the helm of another game like this ever again. I'm not exactly happy to talk about this. I mean, the team behind this game was responsible for one of my favorite franchises, so at no point was I rooting against the game. Heck, I really wanted to give it the benefit of the doubt. But you and I have both been looking at the same game, and it's hard to call it anything other than what it is. A mess. We're still living through the fallout of Balance, so expect to hear more bad news about the game's failures. Or rather, not hear about it, as I'm sure everyone involved would rather just sweep it under the rug.